last video, I discussed the ways leitmotifs can be used as essential musical building blocks toward climactic bosses or story moments. That got me thinking about broader uses of leitmotifs in video games. Many times when a game uses leitmotifs, they're front and center and easy to recognize, but a few examples in my last video were more subtle, such as the use of Live and Learn in Sonic Adventure 2's Supporting Me, and Bergen Trucken tucked away in Undertale. That got me thinking of other examples of hidden leitmotifs in games I've played, both subtle and clear. There are some really clever ways certain composers tuck away these melodies in larger tracks, alter the motifs just enough that it isn't immediately obvious, and generally create musical Easter eggs. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but just some fun examples from Undertale and Deltarune, Persona series, Mario RPGs, and Pokémon. So without further ado, let's begin. Hidden is not the first word I'd use to describe the majority of Toby Fox's leitmotifs. There's a reason that Undertale and Deltarune are such prominent examples of leitmotifs in the wider gaming sphere. However, his games do still contain some rather sneaky examples, so I'd be remiss not to highlight them. One very early example rears its head in Toriel's battle theme, Heartache. During the bridge portion midway through the song, a familiar melody plays. Recognize it? If not, that's totally fine. I didn't connect the dots either until it was pointed out to me, but... Yep, Heartache contains a section of enemy approaching. I think the main reason this excerpt slips under the radar is due to the shift in time signature from 4/4 to 3/4, as well as it being sandwiched between other melodic phrases. What makes this so interesting is that this is the only major boss theme to sample the standard battle theme. Dog Song is effectively a major version of enemy approaching, which also appears in Temp Shop, but this is a direct reference to the battle theme without being it note per note for the entire song. What also makes this so interesting is that Heartache was a song Toby originally composed for an unrelated game project, which would later evolve into Deltarune. I guess that sort of raises a chicken and egg question about which came first, enemy approaching or the bridge in Heartache, as it's just as possible that Toby updated the song for Undertale. Dating tense is another fascinating example. Listen to these sections very closely. Now, listen to this. Dating Tense is basically a rearrangement of the track Undyne. What makes this so weird is that it first plays in a scene wholly unrelated to Undyne. If I had to guess, its use is mostly due to its later appearance in the Alfie's date sequence when Undyne does appear. That or Toby just felt like it, since the bird that carries you over a disproportionately small gap uses Alfie's theme for some reason. Deltarune also has a few really sneaky cases of leitmotif usage that are quite curious. First, there's the chase. An interesting thing about the chase is that it refers to a wholly unrelated track Toby made as a fan song for the Cucumber Quest comic, Nightmare Night. The thing is, there's precedent for this. Metal Crusher uses a motif from an earlier Toby Fox song, Noisemaker, which was a Cucumber Quest fan song. anything, given the presence of a knight in Deltarune's story, we may even hear a new arrangement of the song later, thereby adopting Nightmare Night as a Deltarune leitmotif, but for now, it remains to be seen. But this isn't the only example I'd like to highlight. Our next two feature in Deltarune's Weird Route. This one is interesting because the motif is not a melodic one, but a percussive one. If you listen to the drum beat here closely, and then listen to Smart Race, Smart Race has a faster tempo, but it uses the exact same drum beat as Weirdly's Warrior Grab battle theme, with the melodic elements scraped away to create this uncomfortable feeling. This gets even more unsettling when you look at the title, Birdly Heartbeat True. Then listen to the bass. Listen to it real close. When you consider how the battle ends, should you commit to the consequences of your actions, well, that makes the song's abrupt end while Noelle uses Snowgrave all the more unsettling. But while we're on the subject of the Weird Route, we can't forget Flashback Excerpt. For the longest time, it seemed as though the song had no known connections to previous Deltarune tracks. Some argued that it contained Gaster's theme, but other than being an arpeggio, they aren't that similar. No, what's more interesting is the backing track. If you listen to the strings, then listen to the Holy, Flashback Excerpt contains the Holy's main motif. The implications of this are fascinating, given that this is only an excerpt. If this song becomes recurring or expanded in future chapters, it's entirely possible that the connection between the tracks will grow even stronger. As it presently stands, however, Noelle does get compared to an angel quite frequently, so that alone is cause for alarm. Editing dorked here with an addendum. A lot of people have recognized the presence of Don't Forget in Dark Truth. What they may not realize is just how much of Don't Forget is baked into the song. If you listen to the discordant choir at the start, then listen to this,
Don't forget.
it's basically repeating, don't forget, and its note articulation in such a stiff and eerie way that some have mistaken it for Your Best Nightmare, which is also utilized in a handful of other Deltarune tracks such as Imminent Death, Versus Susie, and Digital Roots. It's interesting to see a leitmotif so frequently related to Flowey repurposed for generally foreboding situations like this, but not at all surprising given Toby's track record. Sometimes it's more about the vibes the leitmotif carries than the specific character associations, especially since Deltarune, as of yet, lacks a Flowey. As one final note, Versus Susie's opening riff utilizes a melody strikingly similar to Get on the Bus from Earthbound. Wouldn't surprise me if this was a deliberate homage, with how much Earthbound inspired Toby. As one final example, I'd like to bring our attention to Cyberfield and Cyber Cities tracks, specifically this section here. It's really short, but if you compare it to the DJ's various themes, connection between the cyberworld and these recurring NPCs that might easily slip under the radar due to its brevity. I'm sure there are other examples that you may find stealthy in both Undertale and Deltarune, but with the stage set, I'd like to talk about some examples from other series I enjoy, starting with the Persona series. Persona is another series full of leitmotifs, ever since the early days. However, some of its leitmotifs are a bit more subtle, but when you notice them, they range from neat to outright mind-blowing. Persona 4 Golden has an interesting example of this. Golden introduced the opening theme Shadow World. While I personally greatly prefer the original OP, Pursuing My True Self, I can't deny that Shadow World has a catchy melodic hook, and as it turns out, Golden sneaks in a clever callback to it in its additional dungeon, the Hollow Forest. Now compare it to the chorus of Shadow World. Notice it? Hollow Forest includes a melancholic reprise of Golden's main theme, which is extremely fitting as this dungeon is perhaps the largest story expansion within Golden and the culmination of Marie's social link. Regardless of your feelings toward Marie as a character, I think there's something really clever about taking this cheerful melody and giving it a somber spin. But that's not the only sneaky example in Persona 4. Several FMV cutscenes near the beginning of the game feature this melody. You don't hear it again until much later in the game, in the Heaven Dungeon, and you fight Kuni no Sagiri. New World Fool also plays against the game's true culprit, but by the time you hear the full piece, it's likely that most players will have forgotten that riff was used in earlier cutscenes, as the two uses of the track play dozens of hours into the game. Persona 5 features another clever reuse of leitmotif in two of its tracks, borrowing from the overworld theme, Tokyo Daylight. To discuss this properly, I will be lightly touching on some plot spoilers, so you can skip ahead to the on-screen timestamp if you want to avoid it. This is a melody you will hear many times throughout the game as you run about and take care of social links and other day-to-day tasks. It probably doesn't register as especially significant from a narrative perspective, but when you reach Shido's palace, that all changes. Want proof? Listen to his palace theme, Arc. It's slower, more militaristic, and I honestly didn't consciously notice it in my first playthrough of Royal, but if you compare them side by side... What makes this so easy to overlook is the shift in tempo, rhythm, and overall tone of the piece. To a casual listener, the callback to Tokyo Daylight may simply fly over their head. But from a storytelling perspective, it's so brilliant because Shido sees Tokyo as his dominion, over which he is the rightful ruler. His cruise ship floats over a sea that consumes an apocalyptic Tokyo, but but the music of Arc strips away the fun, spirited energy of Tokyo Daylight in favor of something more stiff and controlled. And this isn't even the last time Tokyo Daylight is rearranged to fit a more sinister purpose. The late-game track, Freedom and Security, is even sneakier with its use of the song. Let's have a listen to Tokyo Daylight's A section. Now listen to Freedom and Security. Not as obvious, is it? In fact, it took me quite a while to catch it. But Freedom and Security effectively takes the rhythmic texture of Tokyo Daylight, rearranges it in a minor key, and then makes the note intervals far more monotonous, representing the way that the Holy Grail strips away humanity's free will, trapping them in false comfort as ruin threatens the world. This is enhanced by the song's relaxing feeling, with its smooth guitar and organs contrasted with the foreboding timpanis going off like thunderclaps, foretelling the apocalypse is to come. But before we move on to the next game, I'd like to highlight a few more examples that I think are neat. It's not quite as sneaky at first, but it's a set of tracks that took me quite a bit of time to notice the shared motif. The tracks Disquiet and Tokyo Emergency are fairly obvious. Disquiet is a track that typically plays during tense, contemplative moments in Persona 5's story, in stark contrast to Tokyo Emergency's more frantic pace. Both are very clearly arrangements of the same core motif, as you can plainly hear. These tracks up at all is that there's a much more subtle use of the motif hidden partway into the track Life Goes On. This smooth, jazzy tune plays during exam sections of Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal. At first you might not hear any traces of the Disquiet melody, but let the song play long enough and... what the specific correlation is, it does establish this as one of the primary recurring leitmotifs within Persona 5, alongside the motif used in Swear to My Bones, Butterfly Kiss, with The Stars and Us, Our Beginning, and even Blooming Villain and Regret. Interestingly, there are two primary variations on this motif. There's the first one, where the melody starts low but then has two repeating high notes, and then a variation used further into Swear to My Bones with The Stars in Us and Our Beginning, where the melody moves up and then back down. Blooming Villain presents some of the most iterative use of the motif, repeating and altering the pitch and shape throughout its chorus, though the Swear to My Bones variant does develop it into its own strong melodic hook, which serves as the chorus to With the Stars in Us. Editing dorked here with another example. In Persona 5 Royal, new Mementos themes fleshed out the soundtrack, and in the lower levels track, we get a taste of the same motif midway into the song. The new layer track technically builds from this melody, but it lacks the same note articulation as its predecessor, so it's less of a direct quote. What's fascinating is that you can argue that this motif has been around the Persona series ever since the end of Persona 2 Innocent Sin. The track itself is a major spoiler for the end of the game, and a melancholic arrangement of Maya's theme, but partway into the song you get this. And compare to Swear to My Bones. And our beginning. But then if you go backwards in time, you can also hear it in parts of Persona 4's music, such as Heaven,
removing doubts from my mind,
and in Smile as well. But going even further back, you can also hear this song in the later sections of Abyss of Time from Persona 3 The Answer. Moving forward into the future, this motif actually features in the full version of Full Moon, Full Life from Persona 3 Reload.
which may be hearts and flaws of life, meanings out of the same spot.
And I think that's fascinating if intentional, and I do think there's a strong case for it because of how often this motif has appeared in Persona in the aftermath of the P2 duology. Persona 2 was a very foundational title in the series, introducing many tropes and plot elements that future games would later iterate on, be it the Nanja group's human experimentation and the Kirijo group in P3, the Shadow Selves returning in P4, and Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal's story elements borrowing heavily from Persona 2, albeit sometimes subverted or inverted. And since we're on the subject of Persona 1 and 2, I'd be remiss not to mention the Satomi Tadashi theme, which got its start in the original Persona game, several remixes within the P2 duology, and continued to linger in later titles. It appears in both Big Bang Burger March and 777 in the Persona 5 OST, albeit heavily rearranged, as well as during the Crane game in Persona 3 Reload, where it's a more straightforward arrangement. It's so wonderful to hear a motif persist from the original Persona title, as the first two titles are often overshadowed by their modern contemporaries, even if the two P5 arrangements take a little bit of time to really pick up on due to the iteration of the motif. Editing dork here because I completely forgot to mention the musical reference to Life Will Change in I Believe. Additionally, I Believe calls back to the lyrics of Life Will Change. Have a listen.
robot, and I challenge you. I'm not a better, I'm in your face, and I'm here to see it through. I thought that I told you I'm not a robot, no. I thought I told you I'm not a phantom, I'm in your face.
All this to say, the more subtle leitmotifs in the Persona series are just as great, even if they may take a little time to pick up on. That said, let's move on to our next example, the Mario RPGs. Paper Mario 64's main theme is an interesting case. Leave the title screen on long enough and you're brought to a montage of scenes with this jolly whistling theme. Listen closely, however, and you'll realize this is a variation on the Super Mario World Overworld theme, though it soon branches off into its own melodic territory for the song's B and C sections. You can also hear a direct quote from the Switch Palace version of the theme in the game's ending credits. Considering that early concept art of this game was very evocative of Super Mario World's aesthetic, there's a strong connection between the two titles from a development standpoint, making this musical homage a really cute touch, but that's far from the only iterated music in this game's OST. If you listen closely to the fake Bowser battle theme in Koopa Bros. Fortress, you get a little taste of both the Super Mario Bros. 3 castle theme, but also the Bowser battle theme. And of course, the SMB3 Fortress theme makes an appearance in Peach's castle near the end of the game as you make your way toward Bowser. Its much slower tempo makes it harder to hear, but if you slow down the SMB3 version, additionally, this dark Peach's Castle theme incorporates a slowed-down version of Angry Bowser, Bowser's main theme in the game, which was later used in Bowser's Rage, the Phase 1 theme for the final fight. Bowser's Rage also briefly features the Darkland theme from SMB3 in its introduction, played on the organ. To top it all off, this castle arrangement later gets remixed in King of the Koopas, the second phase theme. The faster tempo and rock instrumentation may make it obscure to more casual listeners, but it's a great way to utilize the foreboding lead-up to this fight and give it one heck of a payoff. Attack of the Koopa Bros also contains more subtle reference to the SMB3 Hammer Bros theme. Some of the notes are altered in such a way that it might not be immediately obvious, but if you listen to them side by side, it's a little easier to hear. Listen to the bass line. It's identical, but not only that, but after the groovy intro section, you can hear more melodic flourishes. examples really encapsulate how Paper Mario 64 is a grand celebration of the Mario series to that point. Not only does it feature iconography from every mainline game, but it also includes Yoshi's Island, if you don't consider that truly mainline. However, this is just one example of many. Moving forward to the Thousand Year Door, Chapter 1 is as good a place as any to look at two very neat rearrangements of the 1-1 SMB theme. Petal Meadows takes the familiar overworld theme, but alters the melody and rhythm in some fun ways that make it stand out as its own song just as much as a melodic homage to the series' most iconic track. What's really cool is that it evokes the idea that this is the start of a new journey. You have the familiar callbacks with a brand new spin, showcasing how Thousand Year Door still grounds itself in Mario iconography, but isn't afraid to venture into weird and unknown territory. This is reflected in the game's standard battle theme as well, which similarly remixes and iterates on 1-1. While this might not be as hidden as other examples in this video, I think it's a fantastic example of taking a familiar tune and transforming it without losing recognizability. More recently, the Thousand Year Door remake introduced unique partner themes too, but what's so interesting about these themes is that the vast majority of them include melodic flourishes from the game's main theme. The only one I had a difficult time hearing it in was Goombella's theme. That being said, if you listen closely, you can hear something evocative of the standard battle theme at the start of her track, which is fitting given her unique title skill. With that being said, here's the TTYD main theme and the use of it in other partner themes. While this has been talked about a fair bit since the remake's release, these songs are so much longer than the scenes they appear in, and many players may not be able to even hear this musical Easter egg before the scene wraps. Editing Dork returning with a few more examples. It seems the remake's OST adds the Thousand Year Door intro to a lot of tracks that didn't previously have it, including the title screen, Petalburg, and the level 3 mix of Rogueport Sewers. Extra Battle contains it, in addition to Tex Requiem. Additionally, the Shadow Siren's battle theme always had a minor rendition of this theme that I didn't quite pick up on until editing this section. There are probably many other tracks in the remake that feature this familiar motif. but as I'm only partway into the game, there are many tracks I've yet to experience. Feel free to share examples in the comments for now. But that's not all. The final battle theme against the Shadow Queen sneaks in the game's main theme late into the track, in a dark, melancholic reprise. Possible interpretations here. On one hand, by taking this upbeat, hopeful tune and twisting it into a minor key, it could represent the absence of hope during this battle. The Shadow Queen is a cataclysmic threat, and if Mario and his friends fail, all is lost. On the other hand, this track plays during the final phase of the Shadow Queen battle. After all of Mario's friends throughout the journey send their hopes and wishes, she could just as easily interpret the main theme creeping in as faint glimmers of hope shining through the dark, oppressive atmosphere. While we're on the subject of final bosses, though, I'd be remiss not to mention Super Paper Mario. The Ultimate Show is a medley of leitmotifs, some subtle and some more explicit. However, to discuss this theme, I need to go into some final boss spoilers for Super Paper Mario, so skip to the on-screen timestamp if you're worried about that. The sneakiest use of a leitmotif is by far Mr. L's theme, but that doesn't mean the other leitmotifs aren't worth discussing. To start us off, we open with Dimentio, Charming Magician, his overworld theme, which is also remixed midway into his battle theme, Showtime. This is a slower, more ominous introduction, with the eerie buzzing sounds adding to the atmosphere. But then the song kicks into gear, giving us a brief tease at Mr. L's motif. Not only does this excellently represent how Luigi has been taken as the vessel for Dimentio's final form, but it provides a glimmer of hope that you can save Luigi and free him from this cursed state. Then, of course, the song kicks into the Showtime version of Dimentio's theme, reminding us who's really in control here. Though Super Dimentio may bear Luigi's likeness, it's Dimentio himself calling the shots as this game's ultimate adversary. Birth of the Chaos Heart briefly, representing the Chaos Heart itself and the power it granted Dimentio in his new form. All these leitmotifs blending together creates a fantastic example of musical storytelling. But Paper Mario isn't the only clever use of leitmotifs in the Mario RPG franchise. Before we move on, I'd like to highlight an example from the Mario & Luigi series, specifically the use of Cackleta's leitmotif in the castle theme from the end of Bowser's Inside Story. In the original Superstar Saga, Cackleta serves as the primary antagonist with the loyal Fawful at her side. This simple organ melody captures the classiness one would expect from such a wicked, regal-looking villainess, harkening back to the aesthetics of greats such as Maleficent from Disney's Sleeping Beauty. Though she's defeated at the end of Superstar Saga, her faithful minion Fawful carries the torch into Bowser's Inside Story, acting as the game's primary antagonist and showing a surprisingly threatening side after serving mainly as comic relief. The final dungeon theme, Deep Castle, expertly reflects this with its foreboding use of twinkling ostinato, somber woodwinds, and dark minor chords. But then, when the harpsichord kicks in, you hear that familiar flourish of Cackleta's theme. It's a great callback to Fawful's former mistress, as he carries on in her stead with a bigger, grander scale plan. This makes a great capstone to the original Mario and Luigi trilogy, bringing everything full circle, even if it's not immediately obvious from the start. Lastly, I'd be remiss not to mention anything from Super Mario RPG. On the whole, the game isn't particularly sneaky or subtle with its leitmotifs, but interestingly, in Bowser's Magma Mountain in the original Mario Party, you can hear a musical callback to Bowser's Keeps theme from Mario RPG. This is really interesting because at the time of the game's release, Nintendo and Square were not on the best of terms, and Square held the rights to Mario RPG and all of its original materials. Nonetheless, it's cool to see a direct quotation from a track that was once in a niche title in the series. Classic Pokemon has some genuinely overlooked gems where leitmotifs are concerned. One of my favorite examples is in Gen 1, beginning with Viridian Forest. This song, in its original rendition, is a daunting and intimidating theme that stands in stark contrast to the generally bright and peppy music in the game up to this point. Even the battle themes aren't nearly as oppressive in tone, with its sharp staccato synth melody cutting through to your attention. But did you know that Viridian Forest melody is used in another iconic track from this generation? I didn't notice this until I was older, but Rocket HQ's theme is actually a remixed version of Viridian Forest at a higher tempo with legato notes rather than sharper staccato. Let's compare the two. The reason this snuck past me for so long is because Rocket HQ takes background elements from Viridian Forest and brings them into the foreground. You have to really listen closely to hear it, and the difference in tempo coupled with Viridian Forest's harsher lead instrument and super staccato melody very easily distracts from this. Plus, by the time you reach Rocket HQ, it'll have been a while since you last heard the Viridian Forest theme, unless you happen to take a detour through Diglett's Cave beforehand. I suppose while we're at it, I'd be remiss not to at least mention the Silph-Co theme. Personally, I don't think Silph-Co and Rocket HQ share a leitmotif, but there are still some undeniable similarities if you listen to the structure and shape of their melodies. The two have a very similar starting rhythm, using legato notes as a lead, though Silph-Co is far more chromatic and descending in its progression, whereas Rocket HQ moves up and down in its intervals, giving it an overall more upward trajectory. It's still possible that the similar texture is deliberate, as Silph-Co follows on the heels of the Rocket HQ where story progression is concerned, but it's still less of a direct use than the aforementioned examples. Moving on to Gen 2, I'd be remiss not to mention the Champion theme. Not only is it one of the most celebrated battle themes in series history, but it has a fantastic musical callback to the series' beginnings. As a kid who experienced Gen 1 when it was new, this opening melody is etched into my mind well into adulthood, but if you listen to the Champion theme from Generation 2, it takes a bit to get started, but the Gen 1 intro theme is recurring a few times throughout the track. It's a strong, driving motif, but in addition to that, there are some very light flourishes of the original Gen 1 trainer battle theme, if you listen here. Not only that, but the specific iteration of the Gen 1 intro theme builds off of the Gen 1 Indigo Plateau theme, albeit at a faster tempo. This carries significance due to the Indigo Plateau being the location of not only the Elite Four, but the Champion. Both Lance and Red are significant characters in Gen 1, being the protagonist and final member of the Elite Four in the original games, and the current champion and former champion in Gen 2. While the references to the Gen 1 trainer battle are a bit more tenuous and might just be circumstantial, it's not impossible that the song is meant to call back to it due to the aforementioned ties to Gen already established. Moreover, this song not only concludes the Johto leg of the journey, but leads into the Kanto section, only to come full circle by the time you reach Red. I didn't quite recognize this as a child, but now that I'm older and have a better ear for hearing leitmotifs, I can look fondly on these foundational games from my childhood and appreciate the care put into these compositions. Fast forward to Gen 7 though, and you get a rather curious case. I'm not sure if it's intentional or pure coincidence, but Gladion's theme in both field and battle carries a strong similarity to the track Runaway Fugitives from Pokemon Mystery Dungeon's Rescue Team. The notes are really similar, in fact, to a point where it feels too deliberate to be a coincidence. If this is purposeful, it's such a fascinating homage because Mystery Dungeon seldom gets direct references in the mainline Pokemon games. In some ways, you could say it's because Gladion ran away from his home and family, is hiding to escape the Aether Foundation and his mother, and is very much a fugitive. So in a truly literal sense, it's not an unfitting reference by any means. Of course, with a series as vast as Pokemon, there are plenty of opportunities for hidden leitmotifs in both mainline and spin-off games. Feel free to comment below with your favorite examples. Like my previous video, these are just a handful of examples of subtle leitmotifs in games. By all means, if you have more examples, please feel free to share in the comments. With so many games out there, I'm bound to have missed some. I'm always happy to look into more game music and the creative ways composers tie together the themes with the story, character, and tone. Also, if you'd like to hear me ramble on about leitmotifs used as build-up to climactic moments in gaming, definitely check out my previous video. I put a lot of care and passion into it, and I'd love to see it reach a wider audience. I've got a lot of ideas for future videos on the horizon, from character analyses for Ventus from Kingdom Hearts and Goro Akechi from Persona 5, as well as some Pokemon Mystery Dungeon ideas once I've had a chance to replay a few of the games. I'm also going to be working on a video covering meta-narratives in video games once I've had time to check out Moon Remake's RPG Adventure. If you want to keep up to date on these projects, consider pledging on my Patreon. Not only will you get your name on screen like these fine folks here, but you'll gain access to a ton of work-in-progress material, concept art, demo tracks for music, and so much more. It'll also help me out a ton, since Patreon and YouTube are my main sources of income, and the more support, the more time and care I can put into future video projects. For those here for Undertale and Deltarune, I do still plan to cover more in the future, especially with regards to the newsletter and updates. I recently re-uploaded an extended version of the May Mini newsletter video due to copyright issues, now with some additional observations if you want to check that out in the meantime. With all that said, thanks so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.